Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. It's been 3 years since ISIS began to wage a war against Christians and other religious minorities in the Middle East. The violence and persecution continues. Indeed, the government has called it a genocide. Now President Trump has acted. He's limited the number of refugees that can come into the country, with some exceptions. Here to analyze is director of the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute, Nina Shea. Welcome back to the program.
Great to be here. Thank you.
I want to start with what you make of this new refugee executive order. Some are saying that by limiting the number of overall refugees that come into the country, you're ultimately limiting the number of Christians that will make it through the doors. You'd say what?
Well, there were very few Christians coming from the genocide zones, and that's what I'm really focused on here, because genocide is the most egregious human rights violation in humankind. And these people were being put at the back of the line. The Christians, the Yazidis from Syria, were being put at the back of the line in our refugee resettlement program. Right. So we got about, in the ramped up Obama refugee resettlement program from last year, right, we got about a dozen Christian families and five, a handful of Yazidi families. That's all. It? And we got, the rest, were not. These minorities, they were refugees, but they were not the genocide affected minorities. And our government labeled this, designated officially as a genocide.
So the word on the street, indeed, when this executive order was released, people were saying this is racist, this is biased against, Muslims, and that it's a Muslim ban.
Raymond, it is, that is false. It is not bigotry to prioritize victims of genocide. For 70 years since the Jewish Holocaust, we've been saying never again must we let this genocide targeted minority fall through the cracks, and that's what's been going on. As far as the Muslim ban goes, that's not in there. It's not in the text of this order at all. The order calls for a prioritization of those groups from individuals from minority groups that have claims of religious persecution. And this applies around the world.
That could be Muslims as well in some regions.
It could be the Rohingya Muslims in Burma. It could be the Ahmadiyya Muslims in Pakistan. I mean, it'll vary from country to country, maybe even some Muslim groups in Iraq.
I want to play this for you. This is President Trump from the National Prayer Breakfast. Watch.
We have seen peace-loving Muslims brutalized, victimized, murdered, and oppressed by ISIS killers. We have seen threats of extermination against the Jewish people. We have seen a campaign of ISIS and genocide against Christians where they cut off heads. All nations have a moral obligation to speak out against such violence. All nations have a duty to work together to confront it, and to confront it viciously if we have to.
Do you support this policy as a human and religious rights advocate?
Absolutely. I do think that we need to protect ourselves, but we also need to look out for the victims of religious persecution abroad, whether they're Christian, Yazidi, Muslim, Buddhist, whatever. And, Archbishop Warda of Erbil, whom I think you know,
He's
Raymond.
been here, repeatedly. Now, there was a story that he couldn't get into the country. They said, oh, look, this ban has stopped Archbishop Warda from coming in. Who's a Chaldean bishop. Yeah,
the executive order has waivers, even during this period that's a pause. It's a pause for a couple months while they revise the vetting.
Right.
In the countries, by the way, the 7 countries are all either war zones, and there's 2 countries, Iran and Sudan, that are terror countries on our terror list. So these are not just arbitrary countries. They've been selected under the Obama administration, and they're war zones. So while they have this pause, you can get a waiver, and he could get a waiver. I'm certain of that.
The extreme vetting, which you just mentioned, can you extreme vet these refugees seeking access to the United States? Many of them don't have papers, Nina.
Well, it's very easy for these Christians in the Middle East, Raymond, because they're members of hierarchical churches. They're mostly Catholic or Orthodox or from small evangelical churches. They can point to their bishop. They can say, well, I'm from this region. That's my bishop. He's still there. And the bishop knows the priest. The priest can be located, and they can vouch for them.
So you think this extreme vetting could actually happen?
I think it could work. And also another layer would be Aramaic. They speak the language of Jesus of Nazareth.
What should we do with these refugees? Many say they should stay in the region so they're nearby enough to resettle if they can go home someday. How do you do that? How do you accomplish that?
Well, the executive order, by the way, does not blanketly say that a group will be given priority. It's the individual has to make the claim of persecution. We have about 50,000 seats worldwide for refugees. And by the way, that's in line with recent years. The last year was higher. It was an exception under President Obama. He ramped up our refugee program. But it's in line with recent years, even in the early Obama period. So they will be spread out throughout the whole world, these 50,000. They'll be lucky in a place like Iraq if they get 1,000 seats for the genocide minorities.
Are you surprised, just in our final moments, by the reaction? The U.S. bishops and some European bishops have blanketly condemned Trump's executive order on refugees. But then when you read Archbishop Warda in Erbil, in the middle of the war zone, he says this will help us, and that Christians celebrated when Trump won in hopes that it would end years of U.S. neglect. What's the disconnect here?
Yes, I don't think that the bishops have read it. I would be surprised if many of them have actually read the executive order. They may be taking it from the headlines. I know Cardinal Dolan said to the Washington Post he hasn't had time to read it. And I think that's true of most people I've spoken to, not just bishops, but they've read the headlines, they see what's on CNN, and they come away with this distorted impression that it's, and it was a chaotic rollout.
Yeah.
You know, it was mischaracterized.
Yeah, the messaging
even
of
by the
rollout
administration, it was mischaracterized. It is not a Christian prioritization. Christians are not mentioned in this executive order. No. It's for groups individuals from groups that have suffered
religious minorities that are being persecuted.
And it's not a Muslim ban, and the word Muslim does not appear in the executive order either. Muslims will benefit from this as well.
Very good. Nina Shade, thank you for your insight.
You,
as always, we'll continue to read your great work. You can follow Nina at the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute by visiting hudson.org.